Hey, welcome back to Talinn Games. In this video I'm going to be painting all 9 of the Traitor Legions from the Horus Heresy. And my aim is to use simple, efficient techniques so that you can speed paint your Horus Heresy army. The goal here is not perfection, rather it's about getting your minis looking good, fast, without spending hours on each one. In fact, each of these minis, actually, that I'm going to show you today, took me less than an hour to paint. For each legion, I'm going to walk through a practical paint scheme that's easy to replicate and doesn't require advanced techniques. A lot of these are going to rely on having a base coat of a spray or an airbrush colour, mainly metallics, because those save a lot of time. But you can overbrush, which is what I'm going to cover in the Word Bearers tutorial. So you can use that one specifically for any metallics that you have to get a quick base coat if you don't have any sprays. Now, without further ado, let's start with the first legion we're going to cover, the Emperor's Children. Now, the Emperor's Children, the second legion, are rich and extravagant. So we're going to look at how we can give this legion a rich gold and purple. Now, from a Retributor armor spray, we're going to dry brush a slightly brighter gold to pick out the edges before we paint the panels. We are going to do quite a heavy dry brush here because this is all going to get knocked back with a wash later. I just mix Retributor armor and Stormhost silver in equal parts for a nice highlight. Now, painting the purple, I'm going to use an Imperial purple paint from Reaper Miniatures, but I would probably suggest using one that you're familiar with, like Venetian Purple by Citadel, because that's more readily available and actually I think it's easier to use. Next, we're just going to use some black paint to pick out your chosen parts of the bolter. I'm going to use Vallejo Model Colour Black for this one and the future schemes. Now, leave any metallic sections gold because it's faster, basically, but if you want to spend a little extra time, you can paint them a metallic of your choice, lead belcher or silver, whatever you want. And then we're just going to give all the metallic parts a quick wash. Reichland Flesh Shade gives a lovely warm colour to your gold, so use that. And then I'm going to give the purple armour a null oil wash. Leave them to dry in between so there's no bleed over. Now that's pretty much it. If you want to take it an extra step while keeping up that speed, the first technique I'll show you for speed painting is just doing quick edge highlights. Using a nice lavender highlight colour, Decala Lilac from Citadel, just paint in highlights on the upper sections of any armour or in any corners of the shoulder pads. You can ignore the back if you want, because you'll probably not look at that very much, and I'm going to do that. Now, if you do any thick lines by accident or make any mistakes, don't worry about it. I did too. And I just tidy up with that base purple colour. And that's you done with that highlighting section. It doesn't take long. Now finally, some thinned down warflesh pulled into the eyes will give a nice mild glow effect. And there we have our first Marine. Nice and rich gold, a good purple armour. That should look lovely in a squad of 10. And now we're on to the Iron Warriors. This is quite an easy paint job. We just need to do basically an iron, a black, and some yellow hazard stripes if you're feeling ambitious. So with a lead belcher base coat, give it a dry brush of Stormhost silver just to give some extra brightness. And then give the armour an all over wash of Targor Rage Shade. Give his bolter a bit of black in places. Just ignore the yellow, I did things a little bit out of order, but this is the correct order. And we're going to move on to the hazard stripes. Give the place you need the hazard stripes a couple of thin coats of your yellow of choice. Avalon Sunset, what I use, and it covers nicely. You've just got to be patient. Then I cut some small strips of masking tape so that I don't have to freehand it, and lay it on the shoulders side by side You can be sure they're all lined up properly. I did a coat of yellow around the edges to limit the bleed through, and then painted the black stripes in a couple of thin coats. Once that's dried, remove the tape, tidy up any yellow stripes that the black has encroached on, and give the yellow a coat of Cassandora yellow shade. And that is an easy hazard stripe recipe. Just one paint and a wash, basically. And that masking tape will, it seems a bit faffy, but it will save you time in the long run. Then we just use something down Mephiston red on the eyes. And now to do the trim. If you want to do the trim, but don't want to spend a lot of time, then I learnt this trick from the official Warhammer YouTube channel. Just use some Agrax Earthshade over the areas you want to be trim, and it'll make it look kind of like bronze. It just changes that tone a little bit, and is nice and quick. Finally, if you want to give it an extra bit of attention, a recurring theme throughout these paint jobs is chipping. So grab a sponge, dip it in some Rhinox hide, get rid of most of it, and sponge on some mud or battle damage across this model where you think it'll look good. Across any edges of the legs or armour, or an even further step on the yellow if you want to go back to it. It'll take like 2 minutes. Sponge some Flash Gits yellow over the yellow sections. Now this will encroach onto the black a little bit, but it'll look like it's chipped down to the yellow, so that looks pretty good. And if you go overboard, like I did here, just use a little bit of Alvaland yellow to tidy it back up and restore that mid-tone. Here we have our finished Iron Warrior. Nice and quick, eye-popping yellow hazard stripes, under an hour. Let's move on to the next chapter, the Night Lords. The Dark Lords of Nostramo have a navy blue scheme, and they have webbed lightning across their armour pattern. So let's take a look at a quick scheme. Now over a Leadbelcher spray, once more, give it a Stormhost Silver dry brush to get some depth to the armour. Then just paint the panels that you want blue with Leviathan blue contrast paint. This will let some of that kind of metallic shine through still, but give a nice rich colour. Then, doing the same trick basically that we did with the Iron Warriors, we're going to coat the trim with 2 coats of Seraphim Sepia Wash to give it a brassy gold effect. Means that you don't have to faff painting metallics if you don't want to, and it's a pretty nice colour, to be honest. Now, the Night Lords, being on Nostramo, a world of constant night, were quite pale. So for a pale skin, we're going to start with a grey paint. Army Painter Fanatic Ash Grey. This will show up a couple times in this video, so keep an eye out. So Ash Grey, give that a wash of Drakenhof Nightshade to give a pale blue-purple effect, and then highlight it with Ash Grey, and then Ash Grey mixed with white. That'll just, it's a very basic highlights, not complicated skin recipe. If you wanted, you could just paint it Ash Grey with the shade and that would do well, but that little extra step gives it a nice pop. The red of the emblem, I don't have any sculpted ones, so I'm just going to do it on the knee pad here. I mix a base coat of Mephiston red and black. Then I highlight it with Mephiston red, and then a tiny bit of Evil Sun's scarlet. And that should do the trick, a nice pop. If you want to go the extra step, grab a vibrant light blue, paint some simple lightning on an armor panel, and then mix that blue with white and paint a thinner line in with the original forks. They look a bit simple up close, yes, but again, we're looking for speed and effectiveness on the tabletop. So from a distance, you'll be able to clearly understand what they are, and they look good. Next up we have the World Eaters. White armour can be tricky, but we're going to make it simple here. Start off with an off-white undercoat. Gracie would do fine, or if you have an airbrush, Vallejo grey primer, and then give it an all-over shade with Soul Blight grey shade. Then a white dry brush, and the armour is finished. That will give a pretty effective white armour for hardly any time. Next we just have to paint in the shoulders, and I do a knee pad with a royal blue by Army Painter. A nice vivid contrast here. Paint the bolter with Black Legion contrast paint, and my trick that I like to do is just do highlights on the gun if you paint it with contrast. And I use lead belcher here. It basically means you don't have to do a wash, but it still looks metallic. I then paint the trim with the same colour. Paint the red eyes with a thin Mephiston red, and then give the trim, if you want it, a Nuln Oil wash. Now for an extra step, you can sponge some Lothern blue onto the blue to highlight them. You can also, if you want to do some battle damage, do some Rhinox hide sponging, and then some silver on top. And then, seeing as we are painting some World Eaters, you can get some blood for the Blood God, and with a toothbrush, just dunk it in a little bit, and use your finger to flick some paint off the toothbrush like this, and it looks like some blood spatter. If you think you've gone overboard with any of the chipping, or the effects, it'll probably be okay. Just learn from it, and move on to the next one. After all, this is a World Eater, and they can get pretty bashed up, so don't worry too much about it. Alright, now we're on to the Death Guard. They are perfect for quick, grimy schemes. Over a Wraithbone spray, do a coat of Agrax Earthshade, working panel by panel. Now, this is because, over each panel, once we've done a coat of Agrax Earthshade, we're going to give it a kind of fake oil wash effect, by removing some excess wash from the centre of each panel, with a damp brush. This will give a nice brighter bone colour shining through underneath, while still making it look weathered. Then paint Black Legion over the bolter and put some lead belcher highlights where you want them. Then give the shoulders a couple of coats of Death Guard green. Next, do a coat of Warplock bronze on all the trim. Then, give the shoulders and all the trim a coat of Nuln Oil wash. For some extras, because they're Death Guards, you could add some grime with some Rhinox hide chipping. Just Rhinox hide, no silver this time, because we just want to make it look like mud and grime. You can also sponge some Elysian green over the Death Guard green to give it a bit of a pop and some texture. Work little by little so you don't accidentally do way too much, but if you do, don't worry, it's the Death Guard. They're going to look far worse in 10,000 years. And there we have one finished member of the Death Guard. Next, we've got the Thousand Suns. Now for the Thousand Suns, I focused on getting the red looking like candy apple red, and the gold looking nice and crisp, without spending forever on either one. Now, with a Retributor Armour spray, we're going to once more give it a dry brush of a brighter gold, give it some shine and depth. And that's us finished with the gold. And next we're going to grab some Blood Angels red, and paint in the armour panels. This is us done with the red. Next, we're going to just paint the bolter black, paint some parts lead belcher for contrast, and give the bolter a quick coat of Nuln Oil. Now, remembering that the Thousand Suns also tend to have some white across their units, we're going to do that by starting off with a nice covering grey paint. So for me, it's Ash Grey by the Army Painter. This goes on in one coat. Then you can give it a null oil wash and highlight up any sections with white. I use Pro Acryl Bold Titanium White because it goes on smoothly and you don't get any chalkiness. Next, just paint the eyes with some Warflesh Green. If you want to weather your Thousand Suns, some silver chipping will go a long way, but it stands out a lot, so be very careful not to do too much. Let's move on to the next legion, the Sons of Horus. Their green armour seems to have some variation across all the pictures I see of it on the internet, so I chose one that's not difficult to replicate. Over a fairly heavy white zenithal, do a coat of Pterodon turquoise all over. Don't worry about being neat over any areas except the bolter. Leave that untouched if you can to make it easier to paint later. Then once you're finished, go over all the areas you want to be black with a coat of Black Legion contrast. So, the bolter. Then mix Pterodon turquoise with some white paint and sponge that highlight onto the armour panels to give it a bit of texture. If you go overboard, you can sponge some of the unmixed contrast paint on those sections to restore that base tone. Next, give a coat of Leadbelcher to all the trim and metallic bits. Alternatively, you could use a gold, like this Retributor armour, either on all the trim or just on certain bits, because some variation could add some visual interest to your squad, and perhaps allude to an increase of chaos within the ranks. Some Mephiston red in the eyes will be suitably contrasting. Once more, silver chipping will be quick and effective. Now we're on to our penultimate Space Marine Legion, the Word Bearers. I've got a technique that will take minimal effort for a red. Now, we're going to do a different one this time. We're going to do overbrushing. Now, with your base coat, for me it's Basilisk Red. You could choose Corn Red from Citadel Colour if you're more comfortable with that. We're going to pretend that we're going to dry brush over this model, but we're not going to remove as much paint. Now this will leave a nice coat over the model, but leave the recesses still black. Now because there's more paint, it'll dry quicker, so multiple thin coats will be possible in a short period of time. For instance, I managed to do 3 very quickly without waiting for much drying time at all. Next we're just going to do some simple dry brushing with some Wyvern Fury for some highlights. This is by the Army Painter, but is the equivalent of Wazdaka Red by Citadel Colour. Paint the bolter black. Now we're going to paint some Leadbelcher on the trim. And then give the figure an all-over wash with Nuln Oil. You can then paint the eyes with War Green for some contrast, and move on to the grey shoulders that the Word Bearers often have. We're going to start with some Uniform Grey by the Army Painter, and then stipple a nice Ash Grey by the Army Painter also as a highlight. That is him finished. However, you could do an extra step to make it more vibrant. Grab some Blood Angels Red contrast paint. This will retain the underlying work we did with the reds and the shades. It'll add vibrancy and give a very different looking Word Bearer. Because it's so different, you can skip this step, it'll still look good. But with that, we can call him finished. Now for our final legion, the Alpha Legion. They have a blue-green sheen to their armour, which we can do quickly with some metallics and contrast paints. Now with a Leadbelcher undercoat, we're going to give it a dry brush with Stormhost Silver. And then we're going to move on to the armour panels. Now mix Pterodon Turquoise with equal parts Alamian Medium. This thin paint is perfect for the Alpha Legion, but if you want, you could do 2 coats. Now go over any armour panels you want to be this colour, tidying up with Stormhost silver if you make any mistakes. Now, paint the bolter black where you want it to be black. And use some thin Mephiston red in the eyes. And then paint Null Nile over all metallics. This is basically us done. I think it's a fairly uncomplicated scheme. It was certainly the quickest for me to paint. But if you want to take it an extra step, we can do some silver chipping in a slightly different way. Yes, you could do it as battle damage if you wanted to. There's nothing wrong with that. But you could also sponge it onto the centre of the armour panels very lightly to give an extra kind of visual interest as you rotate the model in your hands. It'll make it look like the armour panels are shimmering with silver. I think that's very suitable for an Alpha Legion army. So that covers all Traitor Legions. All 9 of them can be painted quickly and look great on the tabletop in very little time. As I mentioned before, each one was painted in under an hour. But if you painted multiple at once, for instance if you did 10, that would let you work through them quite quickly without having to really wait much for any drying time. Now part 2 will cover the Loyalist Legions, using the same fast painting mindset. So, if you've enjoyed this video, and can think of any improvements that I can make, please mention them and I will endeavour to include them in the next one. Thanks for watching, keep on painting, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.